Hey folks, so today we are going to be making a logo looking something like what you see here on Adobe Illustrator version 2021. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is open up Adobe Illustrator and hit Create New. We're going to go on over to Web because we're going to make this logo just on a basic RGB mode, common web page template just to start, and we'll hit Create. And here we have our template, otherwise known as the artboard, up and ready to go. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is format our layers, or at least this is what I like to do. I generally like to have the first layer called background, and then add another layer on top of it using the little plus here. And we're going to call this one text. I'm going to add a third one on top of it and call this one logo. Now this will just help keep everything organized. It's completely optional. You can put everything in the same layer if you would like, but I like to do this to keep things organized. So for my background, I'm going to click on background to get to the background layer. And I'm going to just draw a big rectangle covering my entire template. This way my background won't be transparent when I go to export it later. Now I'm going to lock this layer by clicking right here and move on over to logo because that's where we're going to start. Now you can see I can't click on the background anymore because it's locked. Now to start, we're going to begin by drawing a rectangle, something that looks around these dimensions. Now that's pretty much all there is to it to start, is drawing your rectangle. Make sure it's around these dimensions, but it doesn't need to be exact. Now I'm going to copy and paste it, Control C and then Control V, and move it right over top. So now I just have two on top of each other. Okay, so I've duplicated my rectangle and now I'm going to move the bottom. So how we're going to move the bottom is by deselecting the objects. We're going to move over to the direct selection tool, which is the white mouse, and we're just going to click and drag. So I've clicked the bottom here and I'm dragging it. I'm going to drag it until it looks around half an M, so let's say about here. And now I have the beginnings of my M. Okay, so now I'm going to select both of these objects by drawing a square over top of it with the selection tool, and I'm going to copy, so Control C and Control V. Now I'm going to move this right over top. Don't click anywhere else yet. Keep these two selected. Then we're going to go to Object, Transform, and then Reflect. So I'm going to make sure the angle is 90 degrees. It'll look something like this, and I'm going to press OK. Now I'm going to drag and click and move this on over to wherever looks about right. So I think about here looks good for my M, and then I'm going to deselect. All right, so now we have the M shape, which is great. Now I want to put some color in here. So I'm going to go to Google and go ahead and search color palette, because I'm just going to pick any random color palette. So the one I've seen here is the very first one. So how we're going to move this into Adobe Illustrator is literally just copying the image and pasting it here. So I just did Control V to paste. Oops. I'm going to make sure I've got my black mouse, and I'm just going to make this a little smaller because all I need to do is pull the colors from it. So I'm just going to throw that up in the corner. Don't worry about what layer it's in because we're going to delete it later. Okay, so now we're going to click on one of our boxes here, and I'm going to go ahead and make this, let's say, red to start. And I'm going to make sure that my borders are, or my stroke is transparent. All right, so you're going to want to make sure that all of these are fairly light colors. They can get about as dark as this blue, but in order to have the contrast with the shadows we're going to put in momentarily, you want to make sure that they're at least somewhat light. All right, so I've got my colors. So now I can go ahead and delete this because I don't need it anymore. And then I'm going to make my little shadow marks. So how I'm going to do this is I am going to go to the pen tool and click one corner. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit so you guys can see what I'm doing better. I'm going to click this corner and click to the other corner. Make sure you get this intersection. It should automatically snap. If it doesn't, go ahead and turn smart guides, I think it is, or smart rulers or something like that on from the view section. Then I'm going to click this intersection. I'm going to go down a little bit, not too much, about that. It's not an exact science. And then click to complete the object. So now I have a little shadow object. So what I'm going to do now is click the eye. So I just moved over to the selection tool, just so you know what I did there. And then I'm going to click the eyedropper tool, change it to this nice reddish color. And now they're both the same color. So I'm going to go ahead and I double clicked on this fill color. And now I can change the exact parameters of this color. So I'm just going to make it a little bit darker. So something around here. So whatever color you had, double click the fill, and we're going to just make it a little darker. Now that I've made it a little darker, you can see here we're starting to get some 3D effects to our shape. Now I'm going to do the same thing for this little corner, like fold here, and then same for this little fold. I think that looks pretty good. I'm liking this. So yours should look something like this, depending on the colors that you picked. And we're going to go ahead to the next step, which is making it look a little bit 3D. Okay, so for this next step, I recommend copying and pasting your original design and just moving it over a bit. So you have your kind of 2D version, and then we have our more 3D version. So what I mean by that is we're going to add some gradients and overlays and play with some transparencies so that we can get this looking a little bit more professional, a little bit, make it pop a little more, and make things just a little bit more 3D in general. So how we're going to do this is we're going to have to click every one of our objects, copy paste it, and change it to a gradient, and then make an overlay. This might sound like a lot, but we're going to go through it really slowly. So we're going to click the first. I'm going to go ahead and hold Control so I can click, or sorry, I'm going to go ahead and hold Shift so I can click more than one. So I've clicked all 4 of our main boxes. We're not going to click the shadow parts, just our main boxes that make up this M. And we're going to copy and paste them so that they sit right over top. I think that's over top. There we go. All right, so now we've got our shape sitting just over top. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on all of them again, and I'm going to go to gradient. I'm going to make these gradiented. So your gradient by default should look something like this. The only thing I'm going to do to change this up, I think, is maybe make the darks a little darker, just so we have a little bit more of contrast. You'll see in the next step. But other than that, you don't have to change too much. Just make it look something like this. Make sure you have enough contrast by moving that black up, or if you want a lighter shape, you can move that white up. But as long as you have a nice amount of contrast, like something around this is nice. Maybe I'll make it a little less harsh. Something around here. Okay, so we have our gradient, and we're gonna go ahead and escape that. And now we are going to go to transparency. So this is right beside gradient. So how I got to it is I was on my little gradient tool, which is this guy here. I'm also in the Essentials Classic. In case you're not seeing what I'm seeing, Essentials Classic, and then I'm moving over to transparencies. Now you'll see that your whole object is clicked on, so you want to make sure that all 4 boxes are clicked on when you do this, which you'll see in this little preview box. We're going to go from normal and change it on over to soft light. Now what this is going to do is kind of overlay on top of our solid colors. So now we're going to be looking something like this. Now if you like this effect with these kind of like almost like paper creases inside of your M, you can go ahead and leave it like this. Or when you're doing other designs and whatnot, sometimes this is the intent, to have these lines and these folds. But in my case, I just want to have flat boxes that all kind of look something like this one. So how are we going to get rid of these? Well, what we're going to do is go shape by shape and move things back. So all we're going to do is click on this piece. Remember the black and white one? Well, that's still this. Just all of the white parts are transparent, essentially. I'm going to right click and go send backward. And I'm going to keep doing this. You can use the shortcut if you want, but I'm going to do this just so you can see what I'm doing. And you're going to keep sending it backward until that crease goes away. You might have to do this a number of times. You can use a shortcut if you want. I just want to make sure that we don't miss it. Okay, there we go. So now I've moved it back enough that this object is over top. So you can see it's starting to come together. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this yellow one next, because there's no creases caused by this one, but there is a crease caused by this yellow one here. So I'm going to just move this back down. Alright, so we have that cross gun, and now we're going to do the same thing for this object, the kind of like reddish color. There we go. Alright, so as you can see, we've got a little bit more of a 3D effect going on. Now you're more than welcome to leave the gradient like this, how it is, or you can change each individual gradient. I'm going to show you how to change each gradient so that you see how it's kind of lighter on this side and darker on this side. Same with this part, darker, lighter. I'm going to change it so it's lighter up here and darker down here. So how we're going to do this is we're going to click on the first object, which, remember, is still our overlay, which is why you're seeing the lighter and darker, which is why you're seeing the lighter and darker here. And I'm going to click on the gradient tool and go ahead and draw my new gradient. So how I did that again, I'm going to go back, is I clicked on my object, I clicked on gradient, and I just clicked and dragged. That's how you do this, and it'll automatically move it to the center. So now that I have my gradient here, I can go ahead and change these little points if I want by going back to the gradient editor. So if I want to make things a little bit more harsh or a little lighter at the top, I can do that. You can see my points are moving as I change things in the editor. But for me, I think I'm just going to leave it pretty much how it was before, except the other direction. So now I've got it lighter up here, darker down here, which I kind of like. So I'm going to leave that. I'm going to do the same thing with the next by clicking on it and then drawing my gradient. I've drawn my gradient there. I think I'm going to make the darker side come out a little bit more. I kind of like that. That looks good. I'm going to do the same thing for the next piece. I think maybe darker down here. Yeah, darker down here looks good. I'm going to do that. I'm going to make this a little bit harsher maybe. I'm going to move on to the next object. I'm going to change my gradient. Ooh, wrong way. That looks pretty good. Actually, you know what? We're going to do it the other way. Now let's do it the other way. You can fiddle around with this quite a bit and pick something that you like best. But I think this looks pretty good for now. I'm liking how this kind of 3D effect is coming in. And now that you've got your kind of 3D overlay, you can go ahead and change different things. Like your corners should now be over top of all the other objects because you've moved everything back. So you can go ahead and change these corners if you want. I think I might make this maybe a little lighter. I did it darker before, but I'm kind of, no, I kind of like this better. Yeah, that's fine. This I might darken up a bit, but you can do all of these edits once you're at this stage. I think that's good. I like this. So now you can see the difference. We've got our basic 2D with kind of 2D elements trying to make things look a little bit more 3D, but you can see how adding the gradient soft light overlays can really make a huge difference in your logo. So you can apply this to many more things. I just did an M because that's the first letter of my name, but you can do this with pretty much anything. You can make an A if you wanted. You could make even more complex drawings. You could apply this strategy by making, like, duplicating your object minus the shadows. You can do the shadows on anything, but don't duplicate the shadows. Just duplicate the main blocks, copy paste, change them to gradient, and then make sure the key thing to remember that you might have to refer back to is changing it to soft light. Changing all of those black and white gradient pieces to soft light, because that'll give you a really nice transparency overlay. That soft light overlay that we're seeing here. And yeah, that's pretty much how to make your logo. Now I'm going to show really quickly how to add text underneath, but if you've gotten to this point, I'm assuming you can do that pretty much on your own. So you can go ahead and exit now if you would like. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move over to our text. So I've locked this layer just to make sure that we don't edit anything by accident, and then I'm going to move over to my text layer. Now we're going to add some text. Let's see, what would I like to add? I'm going to go to the text tool, and then let's do my logo. This is going to be my writing. And now I'm going to change this to make it much bigger, obviously, around this size. Let me zoom out a little bit. I'm going to make it around this size because as we change the fonts, it's going to change a little bit too. So you probably have some different text options than I do, or some font options that I do, because I have a ton downloaded. But a really quick way to go through them is to hover over top and scroll. I'm just scrolling right now. Now this is a really, really useful technique for looking over different fonts really quickly. And it's what I usually use. So in the sample photo, you saw that I used Pristina, which is I believe one of the default fonts that comes with Illustrator. So you can go ahead and change it to that if you want, or literally any text that you would like. If you like something kind of more modern looking, you could do this. I believe this is the same as some Microsoft fonts. But yeah, you can use any font that you would like and then just kind of adjust it how you'd like. For example, my color, maybe I kind of like this dark blue, I think is what I used in the sample color. So you can choose pretty much any color you would like, but I'm going to just choose that one. And then there we go. Now I've got my logo, and I can go ahead and duplicate this to go under my more 2D looking one. I like to do both versions because this is very helpful when you're doing when you're putting your logo on something that's very small. Like for example, if you're doing a business card, on the back side of the business card, if you want to put your logo again, it'll be really, really small, like maybe 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. So you don't want something that's more complex like this because it's not going to show up and it might actually misprint. So you want to do something a lot more basic. And honestly, if you're making it really, really tiny on print, I might even remove these shadows and just do the solid colors, because then your colors will show up really nicely, and your customer or client is not going to notice the difference, right, when it's that tiny, but those colors will come through. So that's a good tip there. But yeah, use your more 3D-ified, if you will, logo on pretty much anything web, because it'll show up nicely. All right, so that's it. Now you've got your 3D brand logo. I hope this was helpful, and stay tuned for more advanced Adobe Illustrator tutorials.